A very warm good morning to all of you. So, as you saw, what you saw was that this is the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, where we are celebrating our 75th anniversary of independence from the Britishers, and that celebration has been going on for the last 2 years. And this Dhara event, which we are organizing, which the Ministry of Education's IKS division, Indian Knowledge Systems division, and the Ministry of Culture are jointly organizing this event. And the idea behind this whole Dhara event is essentially where we can bring the need to bring the culture and the education together. Because whenever you see the culmination of education is in the expression of a culture of any country. And that was essentially the idea why both ministries came together and we are celebrating this Dhara. What is this Dhara about? I'll just speak a few words about that. But before I do that, I want to explain to you what is this Indian Knowledge Systems Division, which I'm representing as a national coordinator here. This Indian Knowledge Systems Division is also called Bharati Jnana Parampara Vibhag of the Ministry of Education. This division is essentially looking at how we can take the wisdom of our country and integrate it with the contemporary knowledge systems and advance further to solve the current and the emerging problems of the world. Why is it that we need to do this? Because as our Shastra says, we need to know we need to know why we want to do something. And then we also want to know what is the prayojana or the ultimate fruit of what is the action that we are going to take. If you look at it, there was a report by Anders Magnusson. He was a World Bank expert. And then he was commissioned to write a report about the status of economies, not just for 50 years or 100 years, but for last 2 millennia, 2000 years, around 2000 or so. Do you know what he found? He found that for about 15 to 1600 years, in the last 2000 years, so essentially starting from about the first century CE to about 16th century CE, India contributed about 24% of the world's GDP. And China was contributing about similar things. And India and China were essentially in the top two economies. And India was, for the most part, the top economy. And at the advent of Britishers, it was about 17%. And do you know what was the percentage of economy's contribution when Britishers left India? It was less than 0.3%, around 0.1, 0.2% of the world. That was the decline that the colonial imperialism had brought to our country. But to look at that number, 24%, the significance of the number, GDP, US, even at the peak of its power, was contributing only 16% of the world's GDP. So imagine what we were for the last 1500 years. And somebody who is an economic power like that is not possible if we are simply a spiritual civilization, if we were only sitting and meditating in caves. That is not the point. We were an economic superpower because we were a technology superpower. We were an engineering superpower. We were a knowledge superpower. How do we become that again? And then during all of that time, we did not go and colonize all the countries. See, that was the thing that India stood for. We stood for the welfare of all and the hita of all and sukha of all. And so India's prosperity is good for the world. And that is why we need to bring back that kind of Atmanirbharta and become again the knowledge superpower again. Because this 21st century is going to be the knowledge superpower. And that is why we have this Indian Knowledge Systems Division, because we can learn a lot from that millennia of wisdom that this land has generated. And there are so many things that we need to investigate and then at the same time see how we can adapt it to look into whether and solve emerging problems, whether it be water resources, whether we are talking about how do we feed a world of 10 billion, because using the current industrial methods of agriculture, that is not possible, or how do we make the wood steel, or how do we recreate some of these smart materials, or how do we bring back the whole health concept and talk about health rather than disease prevention, or whether we talk about phonetics, or even some things like, just to give you one concrete example, we all talk about artificial intelligence, right? One of the things is, if we talk about humanoid robots. If you think about it, how do you show human emotion and expressions in robots? Bharata's Natya Shastra talks about how to move different muscles in the face for different expressions. We could be inspired by that to solve bring out these expressions in a humanoid robot, for example. Or we can talk about developing new materials, or we can talk about basically new logic systems if you want to analyze qubits based on Jaina and Nagarjuna's Bauddhic logic, Chatushkoti and Jaina logic of Ashtakoti and things like that. We can extend those frameworks to theoretical stuff. So there is so much to learn from the wisdom of our ancestors, but at the same time, we cannot be content with singing past glories. We need to be taking the modern contemporary knowledge systems and advancing our things further. That is what we at Indian Knowledge Systems do. We have lots of opportunities for you all, whether you are a school child, or whether you are an undergrad student or a PhD student or a faculty member or an institution. We have internships for undergrad students. We have course materials and a lot of interesting games for the school children. Of course, that's for anybody. And for researchers, we support research projects. These are highly interdisciplinary technical projects, the kind of things that you would submit to DST or SERB. And then we have institutional capacity building initiatives through IKS centers. Course development. There's a lot of initiatives that we are trying to do. And the reason why this IKS division came together with the Indian Ministry of Culture for this Dhara events is essentially to take this forward and show that how, if we want to become that kind of a knowledge superpower in next 25 years, the Amrit Kal, what do we need to do? So for that, we need to strategize and build. If you want to, as they say, if you want to plan for a day, you go and, there's that proverb. So we need to plan for next 2 generations if we want to be that. And this Dhara event is essentially, this is one of the prime focuses of this Dhara event. We bring in some of the best thinkers in a particular discipline, assemble them together and then ask them to deliberate upon and then help us come up with a white paper which will show us the path forward. And that is essentially the focus of, one of the primary focus of any Dhara event. And the second focus of Dhara event is to do the Jan Bhagidari, because we need to take this message to the common people and audience, whether it is common people or students or different types of stakeholders. So that is the other part of what this Dhara event is. So we have done many Dhara events. This is one of the 7th event. We have done on mathematics, we have done on culture, we have done on Dhara event on Ayurveda, martial art traditions of India. India is not just the mother of all democracies, we are also the mother of all martial arts. And you will see Kalari Payattu team come here. They'll be again, for those of you who are on campus, they'll be helping. If you are interested, you can practice with them for the next 1 week. And they've been gracious enough to accept that, this thing. They'll be training us in that. And then we had done one Dhara event on Sangeet and Natya Shastra. Just last month, Professor Ramanathan is here at BHU, IIT BHU, who had done one on chemical technologies, Rasayana Shastra. And this is basically the next event we are doing here in IIT Indore, because Central India is known for its very rich metallurgical heritage. So we are doing Dhara on metallurgical traditions, Dhatu Shastra. Next month, we'll be visiting Assam to do a Dhara event on Krishi Parampara, Paramparika Krishi. So how do we feed a world of 10 billion? That's essentially the challenge. And as a big country, as a country that has a rich traditions, we cannot take up small challenges. We need to be taking challenges that are worthy of our nation. And these are huge challenges that address the problems not only of our village, our state, our country, but of the whole humanity. It is with that confidence that we will learn from the wisdom of the past and the progress in the present to move forward. As the Vedavak says, Charaiveti, let us move forward and forward. With those words, I'll take leave of you and then look forward to participating with you all in the next 2 days of this thought-provoking, path visioning exercise that we will be doing, along with participation with all from all the masses. Namaste.
Good morning and welcome to this conference on Bharatiya Dhatu Shastra. We have a lot of history and heritage in the metals and metalworking in the country, and I have read that there are several centers of material, I would say that call them as today's words, centers of excellence. And probably there were 6 centers of excellence in the, like in Ganges, in the eastern region and western region. But one of the main center was the Madhya Pradesh, that is the center, Malwa region was one of the main centers of material or iron especially work. There are many evidences of material making in early stages. Like one of the main evidence was the wooden arrows were fitted with the metallic tips so as to improve their effectiveness and sharpness. Uh, Swords were prepared for military applications, and early manufacturing was done, involved not only the smithy operation but the polishing of the swords. And it is said that the polishing of the swords is something very, very delicate operation, requires enormous concentration. And there are many variables. As you know, today polishing operations have many variables. But those days, the polishers used to be more like a very spiritual person. He would probably pray for God in the morning for about few hours, and bring the whole concentration, bring the whole heart and soul together, and then perform the polishing such that nothing goes wrong. Under such circumstances, also, you would find that 1 out of 10 would be the right sword, and the best, or 1 out of 1,000,000 would be the best one, whereas 1 out of 10 could be a usable kind of the weapon. So we have that kind of a tradition, that where the traditional knowledge and traditional systems have been incorporated or seamlessly involved into the making and fabrication processes. Polishing of diamonds was also another important aspect which is known for ages. And the Kohinoor diamond, which we say that has n number of facets, and when it is brought to the darbar, it will reflect lights from all those facets. People were aware that the diamond can be polished by iron, by the graphitization process. If you go beyond 640 degrees centigrade, press a diamond on a graphite plate, the graphitization happens, the carbon from the diamond would actually come out and combine with the iron, and then you get a removal of the material, or you get the polishing of the diamond. So those times the people were aware that if you want to polish the diamonds, you have to press it against the iron and polish it against the iron. That was actually very well known, and the same process is followed today, even today, at various polishing factories and polishing establishments in Surat, in Gujarat. So we export the 95% of the world's polished diamonds, though we don't have the sources of diamond, but we export the polished diamonds of 95% of the world. Because that's where the tradition comes, that's where the knowledge comes, and these people are the inheritance of that knowledge, and the generations after generation, like first generation, second generation, third generation polishers, they actually work in these companies. Uh, as far as gold is concerned, the deepest gold mines were found in Karnataka region, Maski, and people were aware of the malleability of the gold and silver, and they were using it for utensils. Most of the royal utensils were made of gold and silver. Not only that, some of the thin fibers of silver were woven into the fabric, and make saris and make ornamental clothing for the kings. There are many times written, but these are like various time periods, but in the ancient India. Uh, on a personal level, I remember when long back, I was very young, maybe in 6th or 7th standard in school. My grandfather was gravely ill at that time. And it was in a very deep village in Maharashtra. And at that time, there was no doctor there, nothing. But my grandfather had a powder of silver, and he said that it is there in some place, above there somewhere, it has been kept. So my father brought it, and I don't know what it is, but it's mixed with something, and then it was given to. It was a silver powder. It is considered to be emergency kind of medicine which generates enormous amount of heat in the body, and fortunately he survived that particular incident. I don't know what has happened at that time. But yes, that was a metallic powder, silver powder, and it was in the form of very thin foils. Today we see the paper wrappings of the food we use. They are. It was even thinner than that. I mean, you just touch it and it was getting into a powder form. So what I mean is that we have enormous amount of knowledge available, and we can definitely make use of make use of that. And I'm sure this conference is one such a step in trying to identify the such incidences or such aspects from which we can learn, and we can take some of these things forward. As far as polishing is concerned, I can tell you that even today I work in polishing and precision manufacturing, but even today we don't have equation for polishing. There is no, this simply, the equation is that the polishing is proportional to the pressure and speed and hardness of the material. But proportionality constant, nobody knows what is that constant and how many constants are there in the whole process. So, but the people had experienced that, people have made use of that, and they developed it. But yes, we have to learn a lot of things from the ancient history, and make use of those in our modern applications. From the international history, I can give one example from international history, is that when the James Watt discovered the steam engine, and the biggest problem for him was making a cylinder, and making a cylinder which actually, and having a piston which moves inside the cylinder, making a concentric cylinder, and then move the piston inside so that the steam can be compressed. But the problem was making the cylinder was a big issue. So he actually made a sheet and folded the sheet in the form of make it a cylinder. And then the clearance between piston and cylinder was a big issue. So then he wound lot of clothes around the piston, and he tried to make the cylinder bridge the gap between piston and cylinder. But it did not work out. So at that time, because the clearances were so much varied, that there used to be leakage, huge power losses. So there was one engineer at that time. He took a long rod and put a tool on the sides, and using that tool, he rotated and cut the cylinder inside the cylinder. He moved the rod inside, which is having a perpendicular tool, and then this tool is rotated inside the cylinder. For example, I mean, they performed a boring operation, what we call it as. And they said that the cylindricity or straightness of the cylinder was 1/6 of penny coin at any given part. You take the error in the cylindricity of the cylinder, which is lower than 1/6 of a thickness of a penny coin. Where the penny coin is say maybe 1 millimeter in diameter thickness. So the cylindricity or circularity at any point of time on the cylinder was 1/6 of millimeter, something like that. That was achieved, and then the steam engine was actually successful, and it was operational. This was early one, so these incidences are recorded very well. But the old ones have to be dug out and found out from the variety of such kind of experiments or findings. Thank you very much.
Professor Joshi, Director of IIT Indore, Professor Murthy, Professor Kumar, the head of the department, very many learned colleagues from the fraternity, Professor Manti, Professor Shastri, Professor Ballal, and Dr. Chaudhary from the ministry, faculty colleagues and students, scholars, and friends. It's indeed an immense pleasure. This is my first visit to IIT Indore. I have been fortunate to have visited some of the other newly built IITs, the so-called second generation IITs, like in Mandi, Jodhpur, um, Ropar, Bhubaneswar, quite a few, Patna. But this is the first visit to Indore, to IIT Indore. Obviously, I'm extremely impressed, and the director certainly has reasons to be very proud. So he proudly showed me around some of the very important installations created, particularly this very lecture hall complex. Very nice nomenclature of the auditoria. And I see a connection with IIT Kharagpur here, the Gargi, Maitri, and Kalidas, and so on, connecting with our traditional Indian knowledge system and the scholars of the yesteryears. I must compliment both Ministry of Education and Ministry of Culture to have come together and created this very important series of meetings, deliberations in the form of Dhara, which automatically connects us to the tradition. And we certainly have reasons to be proud in this country as one of the very few in the whole world who has such a long tradition, a tradition in the recorded history which runs more than almost 5,000 years. Now, talking about the historical evolution, and that too connected with the materials, I often mention this in the lighter vein that the world can have only two compartments or two ingredients. One is virtual or the spiritual. So obviously we need to connect with the Creator in whichever way one decides. So when we talk of God and spirit, we are in the spiritual world. But other than that, we are in the materials world. And it is true that the entire history of human civilization is always chronicled with the advancement of the level of materials mankind could exploit at a given point of time. So starting from the Stone Age, and that's exactly what we chronicle the history as Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and so fast forward into semiconductor, and now we call it the age of nanobio, or even the future belongs to entire design based on the philosophy of biometric materials. So there, India certainly has reasons to be very, very proud because starting from the Paleolithic age, more than 500,000 years ago, of course, no recorded human history at that point of time, but we do have artifacts which prove that certain objects, stone objects, possibly not naturally occurring, possibly went through certain level of preparation in the form of weapons which mankind or whatever form of Homo sapiens existed at that point of time could actually make use of. So from this Paleolithic to Mesolithic and Neolithic, all these periods, we do have very specific evidences of various forms of stone being machined, not the way Professor Joshi does, but machined in a primitive way to make it very useful. So the recorded history, as the recorded history starts, we are quite well aware that apart from a very few metals which are available in the native form, in elemental form, for example, gold and mercury and others, but other than that, people in this subcontinent already could exploit copper and subsequently also iron. And we do have recorded evidence that the iron produced in India was so rich in carbon that it actually made the sharpest possible and the hardest possible swords with which very many armies in the world actually could win very savage wars. I would rather reserve my commentary for the lecture that will immediately follow, but I wanted to actually draw your attention to something which is very contemporary. We are standing in an institution called Institute of Technology. And out of my 37 or 38 years into profession, I have been all along, except the very first year when I served in an industry, I was associated in some institute of technology or the other. Until now, it used to be, I still continue to be associated with IIT Kharagpur, but Birla Institute of Technology is also an institute of technology. Now, in my second lecture in the afternoon, I'll talk about the seamless transition that should happen from science, engineering to technology. But as a member, as a conscious member of the Institute of Technology system, each one of us should be obliged to ask ourselves, what are we doing to create new technology? And technology, remember, is not necessarily a publication in a journal, not a patent filed somewhere, not even a prototype. Technology ultimately is the one which sells in the market. That means which makes a huge difference to the life, the standard of living of the humankind. So then why are we talking about Dhara? Why are we talking about thousands of years of history? It's because when you look back, you always derive inspiration, you derive confidence, and the most importantly, you also derive an element of obligation. What Dr. Murthy said is absolutely true. Till about 18th century, 1700 and something, till the 1757, the Battle of Plassey occurred, but until around that time, India used to be one of the largest contributor to the world's economy and used to be one of the richest nation. It is, if you look at the entire length scale of 5,000 years, 1700 AD is just yesterday. So till about yesterday, we used to be counted among the richest nation. And you don't have to look around. If you just count the number of nations from Europe who made attempts for decades to come and reach India through the sea route, even before that, how many scholars traveled by foot from the various Asian corners, including China, to come and chronicle what did they see in India and the level of advancements at that point of time. We certainly have reasons to be proud. But at the same time, that's why I use the word obligation. We are obliged today. We should be duty bound, not just obliged, to ask ourselves a very hard question. Why is it still, despite the fact that India contributed 1/4 of the economy of the world at point of time, why is it today per capita income is less than $2,000 per family, per person? Why is it so? So obviously, it needs a very deep introspection, and it needs each one of us to dedicate ourselves very seriously to the clarion call that the Honorable Prime Minister has made, Atmanirbhar, Atmanirbharta. If we really want to be self-reliant, then the institutes of technology, the IITs, have a role to play. And I very passionately believe that we certainly can make a difference. I'll make a reference to a very major initiative coming from Ministry of Education, that time MHRD, called Imprint. I'll make a reference to that in the afternoon. And I'll try to drive home the point that while it is important that we do trace back to the history and see where we belong to, where we began, and at the same time, we should ask ourselves a very pertinent question as to what happened in between, as to why we are no longer in the same league, why we are not a developed nation, why are we a developing nation. So what needs to be done? And I always maintain, and it's not my own word, the scholars have already said in a number of times, that if India has one major advantage, that is the demographic dividend. And in order to harness that, we must educate the masses, irrespective of age, to bring them to a level where each one of them can be a very useful contributor to India's economy. So that not only the quality of lives, but also the level of thinking changes. So with this ambition, I would like to end right now, and when time permits, I'll come to my lecture and try to share with you again my set of thoughts that, in my opinion, should actually be very, very relevant to this particular discourse. Before I end, I must thank Professor Joshi, the entire fraternity of IIT Indore, also Vinod Kumar and rest of the organizers to have made this very thoughtfully organized event, give us a platform to deliberate on something very, very relevant, to create a bridge over a few thousand years, but looking ahead, not looking backward. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.